I'm talking to you, so I would love to ask this question. If we zoom out, it is kind of striking how innovation has shifted. Historically, most of the technologies product that we use came from Europe. There is printing press, steam engine, car, almost everything. But things change when we talk about IT. Today, most household names come from either US, China, Japan, Korea. Some may argue that it's Europe's regulatory culture that slows things down. Others may point to things like funding gaps, fragmented
Yep.
market, or risk averse attitude. Why
Yep.
do you think we haven't seen a Tesla or AWS or ChatGPT emerging from Europe?
Look, I think you touch on a couple of important points. I think the fundamental question is, should Europe look to create new hyperscalers and sort of copy this model? Or, to your point, the European market is fundamentally different and Europe should embrace that. If you think about in terms of GDP, Europe is still, the largest GDP if you compare, the different, the 27 EU sort of Eurozone states. And Europe has a large, vibrant SMB, small and medium business environment, many of them also based on open source. So I think that rather than sort of trying to sort of copy the existing models, Europe should sort of embrace its difference. And yes, I think something, we're not a lobbying organization, we're not a policy organization, so I'm not going to venture into political recommendations or statements here. But there certainly is, to my previous point, a less appealing and attractive regulatory and fiscal climate for great innovators and founders. And Linus, the internet was created in Europe. We still have, amazing founders, Salvatore Sanfilippo from Redis. We had Daniel Stenberg, the creator of Curl, speaking at the event. So, it's not that we don't have the talent. It's about surely creating, while privacy respecting, while, fostering digital sovereignty, but creating that fiscal and funding climate to ensure that that talent continues to develop in Europe, creating successful venture, we then reinvest in open source and sort of creates this virtuous circle rather than talent, creating in Europe and then escaping to another region, understandably seeking the biggest exit. So I think there is absolutely something to be done in finding a better balance between regulation and fostering the economic development of a commercial open source ecosystem. And I think the other point being, again, it doesn't have to necessarily be large hyperscalers. To your point, Europe has a very different culture, very different requirements. It's perfectly understandable and probably preferred that you have local partners that know how to serve, a specific culture, a specific language, a specific regulatory requirement. Because let's not forget, sure, the EU has EU level rules, but there are obviously much stronger laws at state level. If you say compare with the US model, it's more, of course, more distributed. These are nation states. Clear example, national security. The EU doesn't have a national security mandate, while the US federal government does. And so it's much easier to have centralized policies when it comes to, supply chain security and so on and so forth. Now, we are seeing efforts in that space. The EU Sovereign Tech Fund that got recently announced is a good example of trying to level up a nation level German sovereign tech fund to an EU level effort, and I certainly welcome more of these efforts. But I think, again, it's important to understand that maybe Europe shouldn't look about necessarily copying and having sort of this hyperscaler model while having strong enough, competitive enough national level alternatives that can serve their own markets. And that's, I think, the crux of digital sovereignty, if that makes sense.